Thank you. And live everywhere else as well. The astronauts are not on the stage yet, though.
And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roger, planet.
Water towers fly!
Tango down to nominal. Flight downside FD off. Bring in FD off. It's orange!
R45! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage. What is it? Put that in the big bag, Eagle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
If there's methane to be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You bet. We don't need any more of these.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our astronomy night. How you guys doing out there? This is a fantastic crowd. Oh, my gosh. And hello to everyone tuning in at home as well. My name is Alicia. I'm the producer of public programs here at the Intrepid Museum. Welcome to our Free Friday Astronomy Night / NASA Explore Days. We are so excited to welcome you all up here back in our Space Shuttle Pavilion, right underneath, of course, the beautiful Space Shuttle Enterprise. Now, we have so much fun stuff going on all night long. Downstairs, you might have seen some workshops and activities with our education department. Up here, of course, we just had our demonstration. We've got our talk with our speakers very shortly. And afterwards, we also are going to have stargazing out on the flight deck tonight, too. So be sure to go check that out as well. We are so thrilled to have with us here, though, some very special things, some very special people here, of course, some former NASA astronauts. We like to do this as part of something that we call our Astro Live program. So we actually do this every single month. Oftentimes they're online, so you can tune in virtually for them. But whenever we're here on site for events like this, we also live stream them as well. So you can tune into them every single month. But today we are excited to have not one, not two, but three former NASA astronauts with us. Yes. So a bit about each of them. We have with us an astronaut, a planetary scientist and author, Tom Jones. He completed 4 space shuttle missions and 3 spacewalks that helped to build the International Space Station. He's also the author of the amazing book, Space Shuttle Stories, First-Hand Astronaut Accounts from All 135 Missions, which I hope some of you maybe picked up already from our gift shop. We are going to have that on sale the rest of the night and also have a special signing with all 3 of them right after the program over there as well. So stick around for that. We also have Sidney Gutierrez, who was a retired Air Force fighter and test pilot before becoming the very first American-born Hispanic astronaut and served as pilot of STS-40 and commander of STS-59. And then, of course, we have Intrepid's own senior advisor for space programs, Mike Massimino, who himself served on 2 missions to service the Hubble Space Telescope, including 4 spacewalks, and he sent the very first tweet from space. So, everyone, you can give a round of applause for those guys. That's a lot of amazing stuff, right? So again, as a reminder, we will be doing a meet and greet with them, some signing of their books and whatever else you might want to have them sign back there right after the presentation, so stick around. But without further ado, please welcome to the stage our wonderful astronaut crew here, Mike, Tom, and Sid.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Mike. This is Sid, and Tom is over there. We know Tom and I got a chance to overlap. We worked together for a bit at NASA. Sid and I know each other as well, but didn't overlap. Sid was out of the office when I arrived, but it's always great to see my fellow astronaut friends talking about stories from our fun careers and time with NASA. We've been doing that for the last couple hours, and we're just going to continue doing that now. We'll do that for a little while, and then we'll open it up to questions. Whatever you'd like to ask, we'd be very happy to answer. So I'm going to start by asking Sid and Tom to talk a little bit about their journey to becoming an astronaut. How they got interested, and how they got to NASA. So, Sid, you want to go first?
I'll go ahead and go first. When I was very young, in about the 5th grade, even younger than that, I guess, I was always interested in mechanical things, and for some reason I was interested in tractors and things like that, and then I became interested in airplanes. And by the time I was in the 5th grade, I decided I wanted to be an Air Force pilot and an astronaut. The first astronauts were beginning to fly around that time, and my heroes were the test pilots out at Edwards. And so I started studying hard in school. I thought I should go to the Air Force Academy. I went and got a catalog for the Air Force Academy. There was nothing online in those days. And so I figured out all the courses I needed to take, what I needed to do to be competitive to get there. And I was successful in that, studied a lot of math and science, participated in science fairs, did extracurricular activities, tried to stay in as good a shape as I could. And I got to the academy. I joined the Air Force Academy parachute team there, which was very fortunate and gave me a lot of experience. Got a degree in aeronautical engineering, and then I went on to be an Air Force pilot. I was selected to be a instructor pilot in the T-38, and then I was fortunate enough to be one of the very first instructor pilots to be selected to fly the F-15, and flew the F-15 for a few years, and then my dream really started coming true when I got selected to be an Air Force test pilot. Flew it as a test pilot, went through the test pilot school, flew at Edwards for a couple of years, and then it really blossomed when NASA asked for applications, and I was selected to be a NASA astronaut. And I got to fly once as pilot. Pilot is NASA code word for the co-pilot. And then I got to fly once as commander, which is NASA code word for the actual pilot. That's the person who lands the airplane. So when we landed on my first mission and Brian O'Connor landed it, everybody congratulated me on the great landing. And then when we landed on the second mission, Kevin Chilton got credit for it. I think I did better because I think I lucked out. And anyway, after a few years at NASA, 10 years with NASA, I moved on, worked at Sandia National Labs for a few years. Eventually, I was very interested in the safety of the space program. I was convinced that in order to really develop the commercial aspects of space, that space flight needed to be safer, more reliable, and more affordable. And so I found a company that had some ideas in that direction to build a hybrid rocket motor, and got started in that direction. So now I'm essentially an entrepreneur and working on starting a rocket company. We have over 50 employees today, and we're making some real progress. But it's taken a long time. And I tell my kids, if you ever see an entrepreneur who's been successful, don't begrudge them anything, because for everyone that succeeds, there are probably 10 that have failed, and everyone that succeeds, I mean, it's a story of rising from the ashes multiple times. So that's my story. Tom?
I hope some of you will get the chance to fly the rockets that Sid is building. So I was growing up in the space race in the 1960s when we were getting ready to send the first people to the moon, and I was very excited about that story of racing the Russians to the moon. And so the astronauts, the early astronauts, and Mercury and Gemini were my heroes. And when I was 10 years old, I went to the rocket factory in Baltimore where I was growing up, and they were making these Titan II rockets that were going to carry the Gemini astronauts into space to help us get ready to go to the moon. And so I was a Cub Scout, 10 years old, looked up at these 100-foot tall rockets, and I thought, that's got to be the coolest job anybody has out there. So I wanted to learn more about that job as I got older. I watched Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walk on the moon, and I thought, I want to be like those guys, be explorers. And they were professional test pilots like Sid later became. And I thought, to be a professional military test pilot, you have to be a military pilot to start. So I wanted to be an Air Force pilot. I went to the Air Force Academy like Sid, got a science degree, learned how to fly there, and then went on to pilot training. I was an Air Force bomber pilot for about 5 years during the Cold War. But that's when NASA brought out that brand new space shuttle right after the moon landings. And so that was the ship that I might have a chance to fly on, and that was my goal, to become first a test pilot, then a crew member on the space shuttle. Well, I didn't get to be a test pilot. I found out that the requirements were very stiff. Only guys like Sid could make those requirements. But I also learned that on the shuttle, there were 2 test pilots at the front seats. And they took off and landed the ship, but there were scientists and engineers on board. And science was my favorite subject in school. So I thought, maybe if I get better science training, I can still qualify to become a space shuttle crew member. So I went back to school for 5 more years and got a planetary sciences doctoral degree. So I was exploring the solar system when I applied to NASA. I got turned down once. I got turned down by NASA again. And finally, on the 3rd time, I got hired in 1990 to become a shuttle astronaut. And that's what I got to do. I got to fly with Sid on my first flight, 3 science missions, and then 1 construction flight to the space station. And now I'm still doing some work on asteroid defense, how to keep the Earth from being smacked by big asteroids in the future. And I write books about flying in space.
So my experience is a little bit different than Tom and Sid's. I was a civilian. I had never in the military, so went more the academic route. Although both of them have a lot of academic degrees as well. But I was a civilian. I got inspired watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon when I was 6 years old, and I applied to NASA. I went to engineering school at Columbia, not too far away. I went to MIT for grad school. And I had applied multiple times as well, but one more than Tom. It took me 4 tries to finally get picked. And now I'm back at the school that I was educated at as an undergraduate. I teach at Columbia and do some work here at the Intrepid Museum and live in New York City. So that's what we've got going on. So we're sitting here under a space shuttle, and Tom's book is about the Space Shuttle Stories. Yeah, so it's the history of the Space Shuttle program, which. Yeah, so I want to ask you guys this. It was an amazing program. It had ups and downs. It ran for 30 years. I joined right in the middle when I was selected by NASA. Sid, you were in class of 84. Tom, you were in class of 90. I was in 96. And the shuttle first flew in 81 and then ended in 2011. So it was 30 years. I came, as it turned out, right in the middle of all that. And it was I thought it was an amazing spaceship. But I don't know if I'm biased thinking that there should be more about the space shuttle out there. Your book, it was great because it told the personal stories of the shuttle program, of each flight, right? So Tom, I'll start with you on this. What encouraged you to write that book? Did you feel there was a story there? There was something that was untold? And how do you for both of you, how do you generally feel about the shuttle program, the ups and downs of what it did over those 30 years?
Well, the shuttle is America's iconic spaceship. If you look through the displays over here, you'll see a lunchbox with a shuttle and books and puzzles and Lego sets. So for 30 years, this was America's spaceship. And now we've got 21st century spaceships that have taken its place. But for so long, it's been tied up with our vision of what Americans in space go to space on. So, of course, all of our careers were tied up with the work that we got to do on the space shuttle. So it retired in 2011, and it's been 13 years since then. And there are some history and technology textbooks about the shuttle and how it was put together and designed and how it operated. But what I thought was missing was the human story of the space shuttle 30 years history. And so I wanted to take the chance to talk to my colleagues and get a story from one person who was on every one of the 135 space shuttle flights, and put that together in a nice book with 600 photos that would illustrate that work too. So I came to work in the middle decade of the 3 decades that the space shuttle flew, and I got to talk to people from the 1980s, the 90s, and the 2000s before and after I flew on the shuttle, and it was a wonderful privilege. We were so busy in Houston working as astronauts that you never had the chance to sit down and have a beer with your friend and get the inside story on all these missions. And so by interviewing everybody from 2020 till about 2022, I got all those chances to hear the inside stories and then put them down on paper. So it was very rewarding for me personally, and it also gives us a chance to freeze those memories, because as we get older, some of the astronauts who flew on the shuttle will no longer be around to tell those stories, and I wanted to capture them before it was too late. And what I learned was, to answer the last part of your question, was the shuttle was a great scientific and engineering success. It built the International Space Station in large part. It launched the great observatories like the Hubble that Mike got to work on up there. And it did fantastic scientific work, launching probes to the planets and communication satellites and defense satellites that help keep our country safe. And yet, it had some problems. The shuttle was not a perfect machine. Humans can't make such a machine. And so in the book, I have to deal with the fact that we did lose 2 space shuttles and 14 astronauts over those 30 years. Challenger and Columbia were the 2 ships that were lost. And so we know why those ships failed. They had design flaws. Humans created those flaws. As we go back to the moon, as we get ready to explore Mars in the future, we have to remember the flaws that we built into this machine and make sure we remember those lessons to avoid repeating our mistakes in the future. And that's the great lesson that can come out of studying the Space Shuttle story.
Thanks, Tom. So what really so I was interested in flying in the space program. What really attracted me to the space shuttle was the fact that it has wings, right? I mean, out of all the spacecraft, all the spacecraft with humans on it, it's the only one that really flies with wings. In fact, sometimes people ask me, well, which astronaut were you in terms of flying in space? Were you the 110th or the 200th or whatever? And I have no idea. But honestly, I have no idea. But I know I was the 34th person to ever land a winged spacecraft. And that was the really cool thing about the space shuttle, is it came back to Earth, and you actually got to land on a runway. So for pilots, that's very exciting. But as Tom mentioned, we were pressing the technology in a lot of ways. The main engines on the shuttle, we were pressing the technology. As we found on the SRBs, the solid rocket boosters, we were pressing the technology. In terms of the thermal protection system, we were really pushing it because it had, thousands and thousands and thousands of tiles, and each one of them could be a single point failure mode. So we were able to fly it for 30 years and lose 2 of them, very unfortunately. But the thing I look to is to learn from what we can do better. I hope that we have a winged spacecraft again in the future. I hope that it's powered by, as Tom mentioned, I really believe in these Vortex hybrid rocket engines that the company I work with is building. I hope that it's powered by them, and I hope we can increase the margins so that when I was applying for the space program, NASA was advertising that this was the same as flying on an airliner. It was basically like commercial flight. And I thought about it, and I knew that wasn't quite right. But when I arrived at Johnson Space Center and started looking at the issues and the challenges that the shuttle faced, I realized that was a long ways from the truth. But I would like to reach a point in the future where access to space does become routine, and it becomes affordable, and it becomes safe, and it'll enable us to do a lot more things in space. When I was young and wanted to be an astronaut, my biggest fear was that by the time I became an astronaut, all the planets we could visit, like the moon and Mars, would have already been visited. And I would show up as an astronaut And they would say, they would look on the board and say, well, Sid, you have the run to Mars this month, okay? And they need more hamburgers and sodas or French fries or, dehydrated food up there. So you'll be headed off, in a day or two, and then you're coming back in 6 weeks or something other. And I would basically, be going to places that had been explored before, and I wanted to be an explorer. And the most amazing thing is that, as you noticed, I've grown up, I became an astronaut, I got old, I grew white hair, not gray hair, white hair, and we still haven't been back to the moon. And we haven't been to Mars yet, and at least not in terms of humans going to Mars. So it's my dream and my hope and my effort that we can learn from this beautiful space. Every time I look at this, I'm absolutely amazed. Every time I look at the shuttle. Tom and I flew on the Endeavour, and a few years ago I took my grandkids out to Los Angeles to see the Endeavour, and I was just stunned at how big it was and everything. And I'm amazed by the vehicle every time I see it. But I hope we can learn and do better and make access to space safe, reliable, and affordable, so that all those dreams that I had when I was young in terms of what we can do in space, what we can do in other planets, and things like that, those can become true.
So we were talking earlier, and Tom, you mentioned to me that how many individuals have flew on the space shuttle?
So the space shuttle over 30 years took 355 individuals into space, 306 men and 49 women.
And that's a lot more than any other spaceship, I would take.
Yeah, of course. It's a bigger total than any other country has flown into space. And it's, my opinion, all the things that we know how to do well in space today, we learned on the space shuttle over its 30-year career. And those lessons have been applied on the space station, and then now, as we get ready to go back on the Artemis program to the moon, we'll take advantage of those lessons again.
Yeah, when the shuttle program was ending, we were asked lots of questions and interviews about how we felt about it, what the legacy was. And one of the things I thought that stood out, is international cooperation and the technology and so on. But they got a lot of people into space. We were flying, you see the crew photos, there's Tom on, I guess that's maybe your third crew there. There's 5 of you on that one. We had usually, when you guys flew together, was it 6 of you?
Yes.
Yeah. So I had 7 on my cruise. You probably flew a cruise of 7 as well. So we were getting people to space. A large number of people would be able to go, and a large number would come back. And I thought that was a big part of its legacy too. That for those years that it flew, we got a lot of people into space, relatively speaking.
Big spectrum of Americans and our partners got to go up into space on the shuttle. So we had the Apollo guys who were almost all military test pilots. Fighter pilots, then test pilots, then they got to go to space. And then the shuttle opened it up to scientists and engineers who had not been trained as pilots. And then we had a whole variety of people who hadn't had the chance to go through that military pipeline. So we began to have the first 6 women in space who were selected in 1978. And we all got to work with their colleagues, the female astronauts. And then we had African Americans, Asian Americans, we had Hispanic Americans. And so we opened up the spectrum to a whole lot more Americans and their partners to go into orbit. And that's the big gift of the shuttle, was we demonstrated that a large spectrum of humans have what it takes, the right stuff to go into space.
So one of the things that impressed me, people ask, what was the most amazing feeling you had while you were up in space? So I agree with Tom, we were able to put a lot of people up in space. But when we were up there on my first mission, they advised us there were 3 Russians on the Mir spacecraft at that time, and there were 7 of us Americans on the Columbia orbiting the Earth at the same time. And at one point we were going to pass like 7 miles from each other. And when you're going 18,000 miles an hour, you want to be careful about collisions. If you're going to be passing within about 3 miles from each other, you start maneuvering to make sure that they didn't make a calculation error. But 7 miles is comfortable enough where you can sit back and look out the window. So we were going to pass them. They told us what window to be looking out at, and if we could see them. They looked like a bright star that went by moving much faster than the other stars. But we turned off all the lights in the shuttle, And we gathered around, if you can imagine 7 people trying to look out of one window. It's easier in space because you can be upside down and right side up and everything. But still, it was quiet, and everybody knew that was a special moment. And I thought about it. It was one of the times where you got to sort of sit back and think and breathe for a minute and contemplate. And what I realized was that although we've flown a lot of people on the space shuttle, that day there were 10 people fortunate enough to be in space, and there were 5-6 billion people on the planet. And so I felt very fortunate. What I felt was very thankful and just totally amazed, still amazed to this day, still can't quite believe it, that I was fortunate enough to be one of those people. So trust that I'm sure Tom and Mike feel exactly the same, that, we represented millions, billions of people when we were up there. We were very thankful for that opportunity, and so we're happy to share any thoughts we have with you tonight. It was amazing.
And they paid for our trips.
Yes.
Thank you.
I didn't want to remind them of that, Tom.
We were also talking earlier about, because of the crew size and we had some great camaraderie. It was so much fun being part of a crew, and you got to know each other so well. I felt like being a hybrid family friend. There was this relationships that are just unmatched. I felt, even now, the kids I flew with.
I think the best you can compare it to is brothers and sisters.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the way I looked at it. Yeah, the people I flew with became like brothers and sisters. Yep.
And you guys flew together on Tom's first flight.
Yep.
So is there any special stories you can share? Tom was a rookie, right? Out of his 4 flights, you had him on the first, and you were the commander. So you were like Papa Bear on that one. So what was that? You guys have anything come to mind that during the training, or what was going on there?
So, Sid can't say anything bad about me, so but I'll let you have a try afterwards.
There's nothing bad to say, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. But so I was on my first trip on the Shuttle Endeavour, and Sid was the commander, and I was the only guy who had not flown in space before. My other 5 friends had all been there before.
Guy or gal. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had Linda Godwin as well.
Yeah.
But we were headed for space, and I'd been waiting since I was 10 years old and looked at the rockets in the factory. It was 29 years later that I'm riding on the rocket off the Florida launch pad with Sid and our friends. And it was a very nice moment that as we climbed higher and higher, the pilot, Kevin Shilton, was saying, Mach 5, Mach 7, Mach 10, and we're climbing in altitude, and eventually we got to the point where we had passed 50 miles. And that was the official NASA threshold for the border of space, 50 miles up. Now it's a metric 62 miles now is the international standard. But Sid was nice enough at 50 miles to call down on the intercom to downstairs where I was sitting and say, Tom, we just passed 50 miles. Congratulations, you're an astronaut. Thank you, Sid.
So Tom mentioned the pilot, Kevin Chilton, who, if you look him up, went on to be he wasn't very successful. He went on to be a 4-star general. I told him if he'd have listened to me, he would have gotten the 5th star, but only 4. He wasn't up there with Eisenhower and Grant. And anyway, so we traveled together a lot as a crew. I mean, literally, we went and I took the crew on a camp out one time. We went on a camp out and everything to try to, to make sure you build that camaraderie. I asked a previous commander. When I became a pilot, I went around and I asked all the pilots, okay, what did you not learn that you wished you had known when you flew? And they gave me a list of things. I kept track of that. So I did the same thing when I became a commander. What would you do different if you had it to do over again? And one of the commanders turned to me and he said, I would have taken my crew on a camping trip. And I'm like, what? And he said, yeah, because essentially going into space is like camping. I mean, you have to share things. You've got a small amount of space. I mean, you can't order out food, right? There's no Uber delivery. Somebody has to warm it up. The maid doesn't come in the evening and clean up after you. You got to clean up after yourself. He said, so you discover all those things on a camping trip. So that's one of the things I wanted to do. But we traveled around a bit, and we were somewhere. It might have been out. We went to Death Valley. I'm not sure where it was, but we were somewhere. And and there was some talk about a snake or something or other. And Kevin was like, oh, I'm deathly afraid of snakes. And I am really, really afraid of snakes, okay? But Kevin, it was obvious to me, he was even more afraid of snakes than me. So I looked at Kevin and I said, oh, wow, we're going to have to do something. And he's like, no, Sid, I'm serious. No jokes, no nothing. No, I'm serious. Don't do anything like this. And I'm just thinking, oh, that means we absolutely have to do something. So when Kevin wasn't around, we got to talking, and I said, we got to get a snake up there on orbit. And so Tom said, you know, I've been down at the zoo in Houston, and they've got some really realistic looking snakes in the gift shop there. So he went down and he bought one, brought it back, and we were like, yeah, that's really good. And so everything that goes on the shuttle is inventoried, and anything that is not like a normal experiment and everything has to be signed off all the way up to like the NASA administrator. It goes on a list and it's listed there and everything. And so I'm like, this snake is not going to cut it, you know. So we're taking a snake. People are like, what's going on there? So once again, Tom comes in and Tom says, Sid, it's not a snake. It's a herpetilian model. And I'm like, what? And he says, yeah, herpetiles, that's like the scientific name for the category that snakes fall into. And it's not just like it's a model, okay? And so NASA's used to astronauts taking up various models to teach things to people when they're on space. So and they don't know, nobody knows what a herpetilian model is. So nobody will ask, right? So we'll give it. So we put it down there, herpetilian model. It went all the way up the chain, got signed off. Nobody called down. Nobody asked a question. Yeah, of course, herpetilian model. Absolutely, they need one of those. And so we get on orbit, and all that material has to go in something called the special flight data file, and that's where your family can give you things that surprise you when you get on orbit and stuff. So as soon as you get on orbit, you want to see those things. But the pilot and commander are stuck in their seats till they get everything set up on orbit. So we had it set up where somebody was supposed to go grab the snake out of the special flight data file and put it in my clothes locker, okay? So that then we could set up a time where we had the video camera going and everything so Kevin could discover it. And my clothes locker and Kevin's clothes locker was in what's called Equipment Bay 5. Okay, so on orbit, there are two things you don't want to happen. You don't want a decompression and you don't want a fire, okay? And so Equipment Bay 5 has all the heavy-duty electronic equipment. So if there's going to be a fire, it's going to be Equipment Bay 5. So we're on orbit the first night, and we're eating together, and everybody's kind of relaxing. And Kevin's over near Equipment Bay 5, and all of a sudden, he screams. I mean, he screams. And I'm like, fire, and I'm already headed over, darting over for the fire extinguisher. And then we look over there and we realize he opened my drawer instead of his drawer, and out came the snake. It was great. You want to add anything to it? I thought it was good. Yeah.
He was good and totally surprised, yes. Well worth the effort.
That's a great story.
We had to keep the snake out of sight for the rest of the flight because, I had no idea what the response would be if all of a sudden they see we had a snake up there. But anyway, we wrapped him around a pole there, and he kind of would just float. I mean, he was like a pet while you had him up there. Just had to keep him out of the video range. Yeah.
Where is the snake now? Did Kevin keep him?
So the snake. Nobody can tell anything. Okay. So the snake.
It's all top secret.
Is in the top drawer in the chest of drawers in my bedroom, and I'm planning someday. So Kevin and I are still friends. We're going to have a reunion someday, and the snake's going to show up again and scare the daylights out of Kevin a second time. But don't tell him. Okay.
That was a great story. And you told it really well. I don't think we can top that. I don't know if you have anything else, but that was just awesome. Thank you for that.
So
You gotta
astronauts,
go.
one thing to know. So everywhere you go where there's a high pressure environment or whatever, one of the important things is to be humorous and play jokes on each other. And astronauts are famous for that. I mean, you need to do that in order to be relaxed at the right time. And
Break the
everything.
tension, right?
Yeah, I think that there really is a point to that. Michel Tonini, when I was new to the office, Michel is a French astronaut, and he said how he's talking about the composition of a crew. He was an experienced astronaut, and he says, "Mike, you need one funny guy on a crew." I think he was trying to find something I could do. It's like my training maybe wasn't going. So he goes, "Mike, you always need one funny guy on the crew, Mike. To keep things light, very important." He says, "But only one, Mike. If you get two, it becomes like a gang. It's no good. You won't be able to get anything done. But you always need at least one funny." But I think that's true. He's trying to break the tension and do things to keep it light. You're doing a really serious job, but the use of humor and keeping it lighthearted, and you have these great stories like that. So that's one of the best ones I've ever heard. That's a great one. We're going to go to the audience and get some questions. But one last thing for you guys. It struck me as you were talking about our paths that Sid kind of went I would say, I don't know if traditional is the right word, but the test pilot way, right? That's the way Neil Armstrong did it, and John Glenn and Alan Shepard. And when I was a little boy growing up in the 60s, that's all the astronauts were. And then Tom went that way as well, went to the Air Force, but wasn't a test pilot, but still a pilot, but also a PhD in planetary science. Tom, is that what you did? So also a PhD. And so it was interesting you guys mentioned that, because I wanted to be an astronaut, but I thought I never could. I didn't see myself growing up to be a professional pilot or a military person. But when I got to college and the shuttle was flying, and I started looking into what the astronauts were then, it was, as you said, very different than when I was a little boy. Well, I wouldn't be able to submit an application because I wasn't a test pilot or a military person. But I noticed that there were a lot of civilians who were scientists and engineers. And so it opened. You never know, right? You never know how it's going to change. So I guess my last question for you guys before we go to the audience is, for all these young people here, do you have any advice of what to look forward to, or just anything, attitude, education, that looking to the future of what you think might be important for them to keep in mind?
Well, you've all been paying attention to the news, and you know that we have commercial companies that are sending people to space now. So, frankly, today, all the young people here, they have many more ways to get to space than we did as traditional government employee NASA astronauts. So now you can be, working for Blue Origin or SpaceX or Sierra Space or other companies that are up and coming that will be sending their private crew members to space, their professionals, and also, frankly, tourists are part of the new space economy as well. So you might Virgin Galactic, right? And there are even balloon companies that are going to be sending people up to the edge of space. So you might think of the traditional NASA Explorer type astronaut, but you can also imagine that there are going to be hotel operators in space, laboratory managers in space. There'll be people who are going to be adventure tour guides in space, and you'll be having a chance to mine water on the moon, or maybe be an astrobiologist on Mars. So there are lots of different new jobs now that are coming along in space. So you can certainly take advantage of those opportunities. And I would just say, get yourself prepared as a young person. Get your math and science skills and your reading skills honed up to a high level, so that you then have the toolbox full of the skills that you need to qualify in one of those areas. And the most important thing to leave you with is, pick something to do as you grow up that you're really in love with, that you really enjoy. That's how you get to have the motivation to become an expert. And these companies and NASA are looking for the top expert people. If you love something, then you will be motivated to be that high-class expert that they'll come looking for. So don't sell yourself short. Pick something that you love, and then be the best you can be at that.
Tom stole my thunder at the end there. Yeah, that's absolutely it. Do something you're interested in, and I like to tell young people that, here's the secret, and I tell them, don't tell anybody I ever worked for, is that I loved what I did in my life. I've loved what I've done so much that I never felt I was going to work. There was never a day where I was like, actually there was one time, I won't mention, one time at a laboratory where I felt, I'm not real excited, so I changed jobs. I mean, as soon as I wasn't excited about doing what I was doing, I was like, I'm changing jobs because I want to love what I'm doing every day I'm going into work. So do what you're interested in doing, and you'll figure out, ways to make a living at that, okay? So
that's great advice.
It may not be easy either. There will be times when you fail, when you get turned down, when you get rejected, but you pick yourself up and you find another opportunity. And all of us have experienced that, where one door closed and two more opened. And that's up to you to make that happen.
Also, don't necessarily take no for an answer, okay? So in my lifetime, there are multiple times where I was there and I was told no, and I'm like, no. That's not the answer. I'm going to get there anyway, okay? I'm just keeping going. And I had friends afterwards. I remember, without going into detail, one example in particular. Afterwards, they were like, yes, Sid, this went on for about 6 months before I got past that block, And afterwards, they were like, yeah, we were cheering you on, but none of us believed you were going to make it, okay? But don't give up, okay? Perseverance. So if there is, somebody once asked me, what's the common denominator amongst all the astronauts? Perseverance, okay? And John Young used to say, never give up. Never, ever give up. And that's how they select astronauts. That's why Apollo 13 was successful, okay? Because they never, ever gave up.
Okay, I think we're ready for go to the. You guys,
Absolutely.
anything else before we'll go to the audience, see what they want to know?
All right, so anyone, if you have a question, raise your hand real high. I'm going to start down here.
What's your favorite thing about being an astronaut?
What's your favorite thing about being an astronaut?
I think when I was an astronaut, I thought, it was the flying in space and doing spacewalks and all that, but I really think my favorite thing about being an astronaut was the people I got to work with and those friendships I got to form that I still have today. And seeing my two friends here today, it's a really special group of people, and getting a chance to do adventurous things together and solving problems. It's a great group of, it's a great community to be a part of. So I would say my favorite thing, and the thing that I miss the most, is getting a chance to go to work with and I still go to work with some people I really love, but there was just something about being with that group of people where we had the mission in mind, we all were going in the same direction, that the mission is what mattered, and we had those same goals, and that's what I miss. I miss the camaraderie and the friendships and working together with the people I got to work with. I miss the people. That was, and for me, that was the best part, looking back on it.
All right, down here.
What's your favorite planet?
What's your favorite planet?
Mars is my favorite planet. I'm a planetary scientist, so I study the solar system, and asteroids are my favorite mini planet, or microplanet, if you will. But Mars has got the climate that's most like the Earth, so it's conceivable that we could someday live there and establish a settlement on Mars by harvesting the water that's there, converting the atmosphere to breathable oxygen. So it's got the potential for humans to live in a somewhat reasonable way on Mars. We can make greenhouses and grow crops and so on. So, if we're going to survive as human beings over the next few thousands of years, we actually have to have more than one planet to live on, because we might have an asteroid strike our wonderful Earth here, or we might have like a very devastating virus. No, that could never happen. So we got to have a place where we have humans on multiple planets, so if something goes wrong on one, we're going to all live as a species going forward. If the dinosaurs had a space program, they'd still be alive today.
All right, done here.
What is it like being in space?
So, what is it like being in space? It's the best way to describe it is it's very natural. So as soon as you get up there, you realize you're in a weightless environment because you see things floating around you. You don't feel different. And when you think about how you feel, you're like, I just feel natural. And so that floating around feels very natural. The other amazing thing about being in space is to be able to look out the window and see so far and see so much of the planet Earth. And like this. And the thing that amazed me the most about that was when I came back from space, I thought, I mean, not seriously, I didn't lead any effort or whatever, but I thought we ought to change the national anthem to America the Beautiful. Because as you fly around the world, you see a lot of beautiful places in the world. But it's hard to find another place in the world that has all the prairies, the mountains, the rivers, the coastline. It's just such a beautiful place to be in America. And so, we're very fortunate, every one of us.
My friend down here just wants to say he likes astronauts and he thinks you guys are really cool. And my friend over here has a question as well.
What's a microplanet?
What's a microplanet?
So I was talking about asteroids, and that's the leftovers of how the planets formed. You know, the Earth got built out of this cloud of dust and gas that was surrounding the sun 4.5 billion years ago. And so all of this dust and gas got sucked up by the growing planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and so on. But there were some leftovers. And so these protoplanets, or protoplanetesimals is the scientific name for the little shards, the leftovers, that became later the asteroids and the comets. They're just little tiny mountain-sized chunks of leftovers from the building of the planets.
Yes, so some years ago, I think during the Obama administration, they started naming a lot of these microplanets after people. And somebody sent me an email one day where I didn't even know it. One of these microplanets had been named after me. And
Whoa.
And so I told my friends, I said, you know, they just named a microplanet after me. And they said, yeah, Sid, it's a microplanet.
Ouch. All right, right down here.
How much money do you get?
When we were astronauts, we were paid on the government pay scale. So I can't remember exactly what it was. I never really paid attention to the money I made. I was very happy to have the job. But you can look it up, government service. You can see what the astronauts make now. If you go online, you can look under the GS, the government service level of what astronauts get paid. That'll tell you. I will say this, so we did get a flight bonus. Did you guys get a flight? No, we didn't get any flight bonus. So we didn't get any flight pay, right? We didn't get any, at least I didn't as a civilian. I don't know if you guys got flight pay or something, but.
Not only did we, so I'm not complaining.
Right. We're not complaining. We would have done it for free.
Not only did we, absolutely, we would have done it for free, but not only did we not get any bonuses, but there are thousands of people that support you on every mission. People at the Cape, people at Johnson Space Center, people doing this for you, people doing that for you. And you have a series, and you want to thank all those people. So you have parties where you celebrate, you know, and you need to have some goodies for them and some things for them to drink, and it costs money. And so one of the jobs as commander is to go around to your crew and say, okay, there's a new tax. We're having a new party for somebody. Everybody, this is your share of it or whatever. So it actually costs you money to fly, but I mean it's great to see all those people that have, you know, done so much for you, and particularly when you come back, that's when you really, I mean when you land and they're there to greet you and everything, and you remember all the things they taught you, all the things they did for you, that enabled you to be successful, and that's when you have the biggest party of all. It's called a splashdown party. So yeah. And that's a really good party.
Yeah, so we didn't get any hazardous duty pay. We didn't get any overtime or comp time. But we did get a little extra. I don't know if you guys remember this. When I was in my first flight, and working for the government, right, you would go on a trip, you would get travel orders, right? So a travel order, say you're in Houston and you're going to go to Washington, D.C. for a meeting, you would get these travel orders, and it would say, you know, from Houston, Texas to Washington, D.C. and return, and this much for the, you know, lodging, and you get a per diem for your meals and all that stuff, and it'd all be listed out. Because it's a government thing, and all it's kind of county accountant does all this work, and this is how much money you have to go, and you have to sign your travel orders. It's all official, you know, government accounting. So we're getting ready to go on my first flight to the launch, and the secretary comes in and says, Mike, we need you to sign your travel orders. I'm like, travel orders for what? She goes, to go to space. I'm like, come on, it's a joke. She goes, no, it's not. And it's a government operation. So I look at these travel orders, and it says, from Kennedy Space Center, Florida, to low Earth orbit, and return. I was very happy to see that. That at least they're planning to get me back, right? And then it had all this stuff, just like regular travel orders, right? It had lodging, and it said provided, because you're going to sleep on a spaceship. Meals, provided. You're gonna eat on a spaceship. Everything was provided. Transportation, provided. You're gonna fly on the spaceship. So everything was 0, 0, 0, 0, except miscellaneous and incidental expenses, $3 a day, something like that. So when you return from space, no matter forever how many days you were, you got $3 a day. That's what you got, because they couldn't figure out. Maybe they figured it out now. They didn't figure out how to zero it out. And the best part about it, since it was like a reimbursement, was tax-free. So $3 a day was what you got.
Yeah, and I tried to trace that down, and as near as I could tell, it went back to Civil War days when you had to pay to get laundry done.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's what the $3 was for laundry and stuff like that. Yeah.
Wow.
All right, over here.
But still, it's a great job. Don't worry about the money. Do what you like. It's great. It was well worth it. Okay, go ahead.
How hard was it to slow down the space shuttles before landing on the Earth?
Okay, well, I'll let you comment on that, but very quickly, to get back home, when you're falling around the planet at 17,500 miles an hour on the shuttle, you only have to slow down by about 200 miles an hour to get it to dip into the outer reaches of the atmosphere. And then the air molecules bumping up against the ship will start to drag it and slow it down. So the rockets only fire for about 2.5 minutes to slow you down by 200 miles an hour. And then half an orbit later, you're going to start to run into the air. And then that begins the process of heating up the heat shield. But all of that heat means drag and a deceleration force that will eventually be guided by the autopilot to a landing site. And that's where Sid, the commander, would take over to fly the ship.
Okay, straight back from there.
When is it too late to decide that you want to be an astronaut?
When is it too late?
How old would be too old?
Yeah. I don't know if I know people that were selected when they were like 42, I think. So
yeah, I think even though we had John Phillips in our class was, we called him Fossil. He was the oldest. At the time of selection, he was, I think, 44, 45, maybe. But I don't think, and they may have had there's no age discrimination. So, I mean, legally, there's no age discrimination. So there's no necessary, like, official limit for that.
As long as you pass the physical, and they think that they'll get enough work out of you over the next 10 years or so to get the return on the training that they put into you, then they consider you eligible to be hired. So there's no formal age limit. And I flew with a guy on my third flight who was 61, and that record has been eclipsed by several people since then. But there's no retirement age for astronauts as long as they've got opportunities and you pass the flight physical.
Was that Story?
Story.
Yeah, he was 61, but he behaved like he was like about 18 or 19 most of the time. So,
Don Pettit, my astronaut classmate, is in space right now. Don, and I don't know how it's going to work out, but he might be turning 70 years old in space. So Don was in my astronaut class 28 years ago now when we were selected, and he was one of the older guys in our class when he was selected. He applied like 6 or 7 times to be an astronaut. He got rejected. He got interviewed a bunch of times. Then they didn't interview him, and then he got picked in my class when he was one of the older guys. And now they can't get rid of the guy. And so he's up in space right now. Have a good thought for him. But so yeah, as long as you got to stay healthy, and it's possible.
They keep sending Don to space, but he keeps coming back.
Over here.
If one person can be on the moon, then why can't other astronauts? I mean, aren't they also qualified?
Could you run that by us again? Maybe
So
go ahead,
I
Alicia.
think basically the people who went onto the moon, how do you get qualified to be on the moon, and how do they get selected to be able to do it? Oh, why have no astronauts been to the moon since the last time we went to the moon? Is that what? aren't they also qualified?
So you need a very special spacecraft in order to get from the Earth to 200,000 miles to the moon and then orbit the moon and land on the moon and come back. And the space shuttle didn't have that capability. It was designed to go into low Earth orbit around the Earth and then come back and land on the Earth. And so the United States at that point hadn't made the decision to return to the moon. Now they have. They're working on a spacecraft that can take us back to the moon. So in the future, astronauts will have an opportunity to build facilities on the moon, do additional research on the moon, perhaps return valuable elements and products like helium-3 and things like that from the moon.
Within the next 3 years or so, we'll probably see the first Americans and their partners go back to the moon, we hope. Cross your fingers.
And this time it'll be to stay, don't you think? You know, it was the most amazing accomplishment, I think, or one of the most amazing accomplishments in history was the landing on the moon, and that was really hard, and it's even harder to go there and stay, and that's what we're trying to do next, and it's taken a long time for us to get back to do that, but hopefully that'll be happening soon, where we can put a settlement there and a research station and have people there, more like we have on the International Space Station. They're more of a permanent presence there.
All right, over here.
So have you ever returned back to Earth and then forgot gravity existed?
Oh, my favorite story about that is I came back from my 18-day trip, the longest I had, on Columbia. And we got off the shuttle and we got transported in a van over to the medical lab. And they do tests on you when you get back. They take your blood pressure and temperature. And so I was getting my checkup, and they said, Tom, would you like something cold to drink? And I said, of course, that would be wonderful. So they had a nice glass of cold grape juice, purple grape juice. It looked really good. And so the nurse handed me the glass of grape juice in the brand new laboratory, and I forgot how you have to squeeze the glass to hold it. I thought it was just going to float in front of me. So it just went whoop right through my fingers and splatted on the floor. On their brand new carpet is this big purple grape juice stain. And I said, they're never going to invite me back here again. So, yeah, it takes a couple of days to remember how to hold things again.
All right, right behind her.
Hi, thank you for paving the way and being an inspiration for so many of us. As a former Boeing engineer, I'm very, very curious if you have any thoughts that you'd be okay with sharing about the current situation with Starliner.
Sure. I think I haven't heard much since it got back, but I watched the press conference and was keeping up with what was going on with the flight. It was a test flight. From what the folks who were in charge, who we all know, Steve Stitch and Dana Weigel, people who trained us, Ken Bowersock's a good friend of ours. They got about 90% of their objectives done. I mean, a big thing was to get the crew back inside of the spaceship, but that unfortunately didn't happen. But they learned a lot about the spacecraft. They learned about how to use the thrusters. A big problem they had was with their thrusters being able to steer. They've learned a lot about it. It doesn't even seem like, from what they were saying, they're going to need to change out much of it's how they used them. They got them a little bit too hot, apparently, the way they were being used. So it looks as though they're going to be able to hopefully requalify it so it can fly again without too many changes. I think that maybe is an optimistic view, but I think that might be the case. And I think anything's possible. They may be able to fly it again on an operational flight with crew on board. What do you got, Sid?
So I think, what they learned after they launched the vehicle in terms of things heating up and things changing when they used the thrusters, maybe more than they had planned or whatever. I think that drove them to the decision to not take a chance on bringing the astronauts back. And I think that was a very good decision, okay? So I look at that decision making, and I think that was a good decision. And, the astronauts that are up there, they'll enjoy being up there a little bit longer, but it's like if you go on a one-week trip and wind up staying 6 months, and that's a little bit different. So that'll be different for them, but I think it was the right decision, and they're professionals and they understand that that's the way you make professional decisions.
All right, we have time for just a couple more questions. We have one over here.
What does space smell like?
Well, I went on 3 spacewalks on my trip on Atlantis to help build the space station. And so when I came back inside with my friend Bob Kerbeam, we closed the outer door and we let the air back into the airlock. And then you take your helmet and your gloves off with the help of your friends. And so the first thing I smelled was sort of a burnt electrical insulation smell, or maybe the smell of like burning fireworks or gunpowder. And only when I got my nose close to my spacesuit did I really smell that. But in that airlock area, it lasted for a few minutes. So some people call that the smell of space. What I think it is that when you're outside in a spacewalk, the little tenuous atmosphere that's left up that high, 220 miles up, is mostly little individual atoms of oxygen, oxygen atoms. And then when you come back inside, you let the atmosphere back in the airlock, it's oxygen, O2. That's the molecules that we're breathing right now. So O2 and O add up to O3, which is an element or a compound called ozone. And so that form of oxygen, ozone, has that burnt insulation smell. You often smell it when there's overheating wiring, and it creates ozone in the local atmosphere around the hot wire. So that's what I think it is, and it dissipates in the cabin in just a few minutes. What's your experience?
That's a great explanation of it. The same thing, and I noticed that not only when I took my helmet off, but on we had 2. I was one of the spacewalking teams on my missions. We had another one. So while they were still in their suits, we could open up the hatch and go in there and take a smell of what it smelled like. Because I wanted to smell this because I had a heads up. I remember Sergei Krikalev, one of my first astronaut office meetings. They had come back. I forget whatever flight he was on, and he said that the odor that he smelled in the airlock on the shuttle was the same that he smelled in the airlock on Mir. And I was like, well, what is this all about? And I asked him about it, and he says that smell of space. So I wanted to see what it was like. Yeah, it was SCS-88. So I wanted to smell it, and what I thought it might have been, Tom, was like the outgassing of the metal of the orbiter, because it has a very metallic, like that burnt metallic smell. But I like your explanation. I haven't heard that explanation. Have you heard that before? That's a good one.
It's scientific too.
It's very scientific. He had O and O2, and but I had that.
I think we can repeat that. Yeah.
I think it's good. Even O1 and 2 is 3. That's what it is. The O3, the ozone. But I hadn't heard that explanation of it before, and I think that's right on, because it has this. It's kind of metallic, but it really is more of a burnt smell than a metallic smell, like a burnt metal kind of smells. So that's what we think smell. So do you actually think that's what if you could take your helmet off and take a whiff, you think that's what the vacuum would smell like?
Yeah, I think the little oxygen individual atoms are sticking to the outside of your spacesuit. You bring them back in, and then there's only one layer, atomic layer deep. You let the air back in, you get O2 plus O, and you get O3. And then that dissipates very rapidly inside the larger volume of the cabin here.
I like that better than the outgassing, because the outgassing wouldn't be the smell of space. It's the smell of the metal outgassing. So that's
try it out
cool
for yourself.
All right, and we have time for one last question. But again, everyone, if you have other questions, they will be signing over there, and you can ask as many as you want. Go ahead.
So when I saw in some pictures that you guys had like black hair, and now you have...
I did not know what she was going to ask. I apologize.
So how many days were you in space?
I don't know. In our flights, we all take, radiation and other things happen to us. When I came back from my first, I had dark hair on my first flight, or darker. I didn't have much gray hair. And I got back, and about 2 weeks later, I was out at Ellington Field doing something, getting ready to go fly. And Jeff Ashby comes up to me. He goes, "What's going on with the white hair?" I'm like, "I don't know." And I looked, and I started going gray right after my space flight. And I didn't even have a gray period. It went right to white. I wish I had gray hair. I went right to white. I don't think NASA's telling me everything. I think there's something they're just keeping, don't tell them about it. So I don't know. I'm mystified myself.
All right, everyone. Thank you all so much. Here, let me just straight out here. One more round of applause, everyone, for our amazing astronauts here. Thank you three so much.
Thanks for coming.
All right, everyone. So Thank you for joining us up here. Again, if you have any other questions or if you'd like to take photos or have anything signed, we're going to line up right back there for the signing. Excellent. All right. But thank you so much again for tuning in from home and coming out here for our Astronomy Night and NASA Explorer Day. Again, I'd like to give a special shout out to our ASL interpreters as well as our Spanish language translators who've been here all night with us as well. Thank you so much for that. And again, we'll be lining up right back there, as many of you see already, for the signing. If you haven't already picked up your copy, we still have plenty of them back in the gift shop back there, so please do make sure you do that as well. And then afterwards, make sure that you head out to our flight deck, where we're going to be doing some stargazing with our Amateur Astronomers Association. For those of you watching at home, though, thanks so much again for tuning in, and everyone else, have a great rest of your astronomy night. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
And here we go. We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be normal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roger, planet.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Echo down to nominal. Flight downside FD off. Bring in FD off. It's orange! 145! Oh my god! Decollage! What is it? Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
This methane will be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You dead? Sure. We don't need any more of these.